All right, show me the money. NFL picks for week 14 here on the podcast. We are closing down the regular season. We got just over a month to go in terms of action here. Join me today to make some picks for week 14. One of my good friends, the host of the Sports in the Waiting Room podcast, Christopher Russo, is here. Christopher, how are you?
I'm all right. Thanks, Mike. You can consider me a co-host. I have probably several personalities in the back of my head, so it would make sense.
Yeah, it would make some sense here. And I gotta say, I feel like we do our annual New York football check-in here. Things have gotten quite dire for both of these teams.
Yeah, it's gotten dark. It's gotten dark for the New York teams. It is not to say that's been particularly unusual. It wasn't like it was a bad year last year for both of them, obviously, but I think you thought last year those would sort of be an anomaly considering what had happened because the Giants had made the playoffs the year before and they had won a playoff game the year before. And then, of course, the Jets, you figured Rodgers got hurt a few plays in, and even then they still won 7 games, which should show, they're still a pretty good team. And then just hit the fan this year. That was, particularly rough start for the Giants, rough start for the Jets. I still think they're going to be. I actually think the Giants are in an okay position if they hold on to Dable and Shane. I think they need to wait it out because those guys haven't had a proper quarterback, obviously, or at least a quarterback that hasn't been under, just pure fire and PTSD from having no offensive line for 5 years. So I think if they stick with them, they're going to be fine. I don't think John Mara is as ill-advised as a lot of the media makes him out to be.
Yeah. Talk about these teams here. Obviously, not a good year for the Giants. They were the first team eliminated from the playoffs on Thanksgiving. They lose to the Cowboys here. They're 2-10 on the season. Obviously, we've seen Daniel Jones is now out. He's on the Viking practice squad here. We have some rumbling discontent in the Giant locker room with Dable here. So, what do you think about the Giants here as they get ready to host the Saints this week? What your takeaway from what we've seen out of them this year?
Well, it's funny because, well, first off, they're going to have to lose. They are going to have to end up with, and you know what? I am not a proponent of tanking, but the truth is, this is a team that has to have probably a top 3 pick at least to ensure the quarterback of the future for them because they have to pick a quarterback at this point. The offensive line is still far from perfect, but it is far better than anything they have had since they last won the Super Bowl. And that's been their biggest problem for a long, long time. So, look, what's funny is you look at them, though, and you look at the Jets, too. They've lost 6 one-score games. And that should also tell you how much parity there actually is in this league, how close things really are, how much this really is a game of inches. But there are several games that they probably actually should have won. Probably both of those games against Washington, the Steeler game, honestly, they could have won both Cowboy games. And like the only games that I think were truly, they absolutely should have lost were the Viking game and the Eagle game, because every other one of those games they were in it. And if you have a proper quarterback, probably that makes a big difference. So I don't think they are that far away from being a contending football team again. Malik Neighbors is obviously troubled, but I don't think he's OBJ level crazy. And I also think you can give him a little bit more of a leash when you factor in this is a guy in his first year, does not have a proper quarterback. If you keep Dable and Shane in just to kind of whisper in his ear, look, we're going to get you somebody better next year. Okay. We're going to have somebody to throw you the football. I think things will settle, but again, it is a process. But as it has been, look at the Detroit Lions. That's the team that you slowly saw improve over the course of 3 or 4 years. Now the Giants are going to have a quicker turnaround if you're going to hold on to Dable and Shane, but I don't think they are actually that far away from being a contending football team again.
Yeah, it's really interesting with them because you mentioned all these one-score games they've played. As well as they feel like that it's once you start losing, this losses snowball. It's hard to break that snowball here at the Giants. Although, it makes you wonder here. We know that John Mara early that year at that events for the documentary about his father, talked about I've churned through guys too quickly. I need to be more patient. I'll give these guys another year. Especially some of the stuff I heard after the Tampa game. Obviously, they played a little better against the Cowboys, but some stuff coming out of that locker room like makes you very concerned if you're a Mara, saying like, does my coach lose the locker room here?
Yeah, it's understandable. I think the good news if you're the Giants is that it seems like it's only the really young guys that are. It seems like Neighbors is the only one who's being really that vocal. I think he still has. I think he's still right in the ear of guys like Dexter Lawrence. If you want to win that locker room, I think Dexter Lawrence is the guy through whom you'll have to win it. He is undoubtedly their best player and has been their best player for some time. Not to mention, probably with Aaron Donald's retirement, probably the best player at his position in the league. The thing is, the difference between these guys, between Brian Dable and the last couple of guys through whom through John Mara has churned, those were guys who, Brian Dable's the only one who's won a playoff game out of all of them. Ben McAdoo got them to the playoffs, but the truth is, clearly did not have the locker room. And him benching Eli Manning was, look, maybe a move that could have woken up the room, but still clearly not in the fans or the organization's interest. Very, very disappointing, obviously, and with a lack of compassion for the history of the organization. You have Joe Judge, who pretty much kind of lost his mind on the reporters at the end of his second season. I think that's the real reason he got booted. And then Pat Shermer was just ultimately ineffective. Brian Dable and Joe Schoen, I think, have at least bought a little bit of time and credibility. They brought some credibility over from Buffalo, where they are really more higher ups there, their assistant GM and offensive coordinator, as opposed to guys like Judge, who were special teams, and you don't have as much impact on the quarterback position. And this is a quarterback driven league. So I think that's ultimately the difference with Mara, and we'll see if he can be a little more patient this time around.
Yeah, we'll see if that's the case here. And go to the Jets for a minute too, because the Jets do what the Jets do. They were favored in 9 of their first 12 games. They're 3-9. They don't play like a team, in my opinion. Somebody's watched a lot of these games. They play like a bunch of like individuals making business decisions here. They find ways to lose these football games. The quarterback looks like he's 41 years old. We're already seeing the owner like assert his will on the season by firing the coach and the GM here. So the Jets really like this is up there in terms of like some of the biggest disappointments in sports history in terms of an individual team.
Yeah, I would say this might be the most disappointing season they've ever had. I think even more so than last year, because last year you kind of have the excuse of, oh, Rodgers went down week one. Rodgers went down first drive week one. You think, oh, we'll be back next year. We can do this. And this year is the ultimate letdown because of the potential that came. And the truth is, they didn't do that much to improve the offensive line. That's the biggest difference they needed to make. It was kind of like Joe Burrow going down his rookie year, and the Bengals didn't make incredible improvements, but they improved enough to the point where they could get all the way to the Super Bowl. And they've been a contender. Look, they're struggling this year, but they've been an AFC powerhouse the last couple of years since then. And then you look at the Jets, and there's just so much interference. I think Joe Douglas, did a valiant job in putting things together, but ultimately it just didn't come out properly on the field. I guess the offensive line wasn't addressed enough. I think a lot more of this comes out on the coaching side than it does the managerial side. But you look at this helicopter thing with Woody Johnson, and the truth is, now with the Wilpons gone, you could make the argument that Woody Johnson is the most questionable owner in New York sports, at least with the Wilpons not as primary owners anymore. That Woody Johnson really steps in with the organization a little too much. And that's what had to happen. I don't know if he could have rescued this team by firing Douglas or stepping in to fire Saleh anyway. But I think that's the issue. The problem with the Jets is they are going to have to be in an even larger rebuild than the Giants possibly would, because I think the Giants have a little bit of their act together. I think the Jets losing some of their defensive products and obviously Reddick being absolutely mad, it's also frustrating. But then again, this Jets team is another team that lost 6 one-score games so far this season. And so again, are they really that far off? But the difference is, you have the Giants definitely going out and getting a new quarterback, and you have the Jets with a guy who's 41 years old at the end of a contract, and who knows if he's going to come back? Who knows if they're going to want him back? So I think the Jets are a little bit more so up in the air. And on top of that, I would argue they have a tougher division.
Yeah, I would say here the state of the team is interesting here because you made some points here. I think that both have reasons for optimism. Where I feel like the Jets have more individual talent on the roster. They are going to move on from Rodgers by all indications that they do have Tyrod Taylor there, be a bridge quarterback next year. It depends if they can hire the right coaching staff to and personnel executives to supplement the roster and coach this group better. Whereas the Giants, like they have the assets theoretically to go do more, but then you don't know if the owner is going to get involved and make start all over again. There's less talent overall. There's a little dissension in the locker room right now. So like it's tough to really look at either one of these spots and say this is the plan to fix it. Like there's no easy answer for either team.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. I don't think either franchise is necessarily in the worst position in the league. I would argue that maybe Cleveland's in a worse position. You can make the argument that Jacksonville maybe is in a worse position. At least, the Giants are a franchise that has a lot, it's besides the Packers and the Bears, it's the most successful franchise in the league's history. And you have a Jets organization that has had some success in the last, 15, 20 years or so. They just haven't gotten back to the Super Bowl. And so, but then again, in the NFL in particular, people have very, very short memories. And that can be for the better sometimes because it puts more pressure on you, but it can be for the worse sometimes because it puts more pressure on you. So it's a real double-edged sword.
Yeah, it is a double-edged sword here with these two teams, and we're gonna have to see what happens with these guys over the next few weeks here because let's make a bold call here. Does either team win more than one game the rest of the way?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm leaning toward no, but the truth is that I would imagine the Giant and Jet fans are probably pessimistic enough that they will say, "Oh, they'll definitely win one or two games just to kill us in the draft." That's what it seems like. I don't know because the truth is, I think they're both probably good enough to win a couple of games still. But I don't know. The question is whether they really finish the job. I think odds are yes. Odds are they will both win games because they are. I feel like you have groups of guys who will not quit, and there are some winnable games in there on both sides. So I think I think it's more than likely these teams are going to each win another game, even though it is probably not in their best interest.
Yeah, I think the Giants are in a spot where they probably are going to win two games I see here because I mean the Ravens the one game you think they're going to lose for sure, but they have an Atlanta team coming up here who's stunk down the last couple of weeks. Kirk Cousins has lost his way. The Saints are playing better under Darren Rizzi, but we'll see how they do it out in the cold this weekend. The Colts, who knows what they're going to look like by the time they show up on the 29th, and the Eagles might be resting their starters here. So there are paths here for the Giants to win games.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the real killer is if the Eagles are not playing for anything at that point, whether they are locked into the one seed or locked into it looks more likely the Lions should end up at the one seed, but if the Eagles are locked into any given seed, week 18 is going to be a real killer for them. But then again, even though the Falcons probably should be the team to win the South, the Saints and frankly the Colts, honestly, are mediocre enough that those are winnable games for the Giants.
Yeah, and look at the Jets side also real quick here. They got the Dolphins week. They never do well against down there in the last few years. The Jaguar game next week, they probably can win. So it depends on if Mac Jones is playing or Lawrence is playing. Is that concussion protocol? Rams and Bills, they playing for something at that point. Dolphins week 18, it's in the cold. Who knows if the Dolphins are playing for the playoffs or not? So there are a couple of winnable spots for the Jets here also.
Yeah, I would say the second Dolphin game probably stands out to me the most. And yeah, what was the second game again? I'm sorry, Mike. What was that?
You go to Jacksonville next week.
Yeah, well, Jacksonville's the one that really. I mean, Jacksonville is either the number one or the number two pick right now. But the truth is, they also nearly beat Houston even without Lawrence at the end. Like Mac Jones did a decent job in that game. So that's an iffy one. The Dolphins, whether they'll play for anything week 18, that's going to be tough. Obviously, they won't be playing for the division, I think so. I think the Jets are probably more likely to lose that game than the Giants are to lose to the Eagles week 18. But I say that because the Dolphins are probably more likely to be playing for something important than the Eagles would be that week.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with these teams here. We'll get to our NFL picks here. So here's what's going on. Our friend Joe D'Alizio was on last week for the picks. He had a rough time, but he went 0-3 on the week. He took the Jets getting the points. Thought they bench Aaron Rodgers last week. They didn't. They have the big lead, blow it, lose outright. Yeah, the Colts laying the 2.5 against the Patriots. They end up needing the late Anthony Richardson touchdown in 2 to win by a point. You had the Vikings laying 3.5, and they end up losing. They end up winning by a point, so did not cover any of those. So 0-3 for Joe.
Yeah, that's a rough one. It's a Jet game that is another one they probably could have won. The Vikings and the Cardinals. I'm not that surprised that the game was that close. I think the Cardinals are actually a very good team. I think they're a little ahead of schedule, but that's an interesting one. You did good work. The
Yep.
Cowboy game did not surprise me.
Yeah, I went 3-0 last week. The 3-0 for me last week. I had the Bills blow out the 49ers on Sunday Night Football. I picked against the New York teams. I had the Seahawks laying a 2.5 against the Jets, and I had the Cowboys laying the 4 on Thanksgiving against the Giants. So 3-0 for me last week.
Well, now to be fair though, the real serious Empire Staters will actually argue that you picked the only New York team in that you picked
Sure.
the Bills in the first place.
Yeah, so on the year, the Challengers are 19-20 after that 0-3 week. I'm 20-15-1, and I have a pushback in week 1 from the Colts. So that's where things stand there. But we'll get to now, Chris. We're going to do some picks here. As the guest, you can go first. So where are you going with pick number 1?
Yeah, so I actually went with I kind of went in order here. I went with the Thursday night game. I think the Packers will cover. I don't think they'll win necessarily. I think they will cover in Detroit on Thursday night football. That's going to be a very interesting game to watch. Obviously, the Lions are kind of like the Packers, not kind of like the Packers, kind of like the Chiefs in some ways, in that they win a lot of games. They win a lot of very close games. They're very I know Jared Goff in the past has been very turnover prone, but they're a pretty responsible team. They won a very tight game against the Bears team last week that is actually better than the record indicates. And obviously, their coaching was just lackluster, just terrible time management. And Green Bay's a very good football team who would probably win most divisions this year. And so I think the Packers will cover that game against the Lions.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting spot here because you getting the hook is massive because that's a 3.5 point spread here. And you said with the Lions, they either blow you out or it's a one-score game. And their division games so far have been pretty close to one-score games. Beat Green Bay 24-14 a couple of weeks ago in great snowy Lambeau Fields here. I think this is a spot, like I can see this coming down to, the Lions win at the gun, the Packers cover, and you get the win there.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's funny. I had said at the beginning of the year that the NFC North was far and away the best division. I just didn't expect, though, that the third team that would be a real playoff contender would be the Vikings and not the Bears.
All right, so that's pick 1. Where are you going to pick 2?
Pick 2, I am also going to prime time. I am going with the two-time defending world champion Chiefs. I think the Chargers actually cover in this game in Kansas City. It's going to be, I would imagine, a pretty cold game, Sunday Night Football in KC at Arrowhead. I watched, I got to see a good amount of that Chargers Bengals Sunday night game. And I know the Bengals are a team that has really struggled defensively. But despite the fact that Joe Burrow has been really hot and arguably actually the best quarterback in the league this year, Zach Taylor's on the hot seat. But this is a Chargers squad that, to me, from watching that game, just looked like considering they're in, and I only say this because they're in the AFC West, they are a sleeper Super Bowl contender. That is a team that should really scare you, and that's a team you do not want to face in the first round of the playoffs. They've played Kansas City pretty closely over the years, whether it's Herbert or going back to the late Phillip Rivers days. I think the Chargers cover in this game in Kansas City.
Yeah, Chargers getting 4 here. It's an interesting spot too because The Chiefs have been like teetering on the edge for a while where they just seem to like pull these games out of their butt, like down the stretch, whether it's, a fumble last week against the Raiders, they kicked the field goal with the gun against Carolina here. Like they play with their food a little too much, and you're getting over a field goal here. And this could be a 3-point game.
Yeah, I think it very well could be. Jim Harbaugh is a coach, whether it was at Michigan, whether it was at Stanford, whether it was as a quarterback, whether it was with the Niners, who is a very responsible coach, really touts the importance of holding on to the football, limiting the turnovers. And I think he's made Justin Herbert into a much more responsible quarterback.
All right, so that's pick two. We're going to pick three.
Well, I'm also going to go primetime. I'm with 3 primetime games this week. And I will say the Bengals and the Cowboys. I think that game will actually be a cover as well. The Bengals are favored, but they have actually played poorly enough defensively. And obviously the Cowboys got the win against the Giants last week. Cooper Rush is an adequate quarterback. He has done enough, and it's a Cowboy team that I think still has some fight in them, and they have some. Jimmy Johnson actually said on the Fox pregame this week, he said, got to give them some false hope. And so I think Cowboys Nation still has a little bit of hope that they can make the playoffs, maybe that Washington teeters and falls off. So I think the Cowboys will actually cover in this game.
Yeah, so you taking the Bengals here with the 5.5 points?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think interesting yet. So I think interesting thing here also here says that will score a lot of points. We know that. The question is, are they going to give up too many points? This is why I'm staying away from the game.
That's a very good decision.
Yeah. And you can watch the Simpsons Altcast on Disney Plus for this game.
That's right. I forgot about that. I really liked I really enjoyed the promo. That was fun to watch.
Yeah. All right. So let's see what happens there. As your picks are on the board here. Pick one. I'm going to stick with the formula that's working here. We'll pick against the New York teams here. I take the Dolphins laying the 6.5 against the Jets on Sunday here. And Chris, are you aware of what Tua Tagovailoa's record against the New York Jets is?
Very good.
He is 5-0 against the New York Jets in his career. Take out the one game in 2020 when he left after 2 plays of concussion. In the 4 full games he's played, the Jets have been outscored 119-54 against the Dolphins. And 2 of those are Mike McDaniel last year here. Tua knows how to handle this Jets defense. The same defense all 4 of those games with the Saleh Ulrich era here. The Jets, to me, look like they're checked out. They don't really care at this point. Go on the road. Miami needs the game desperately. This will get ugly. Give me the 6.5 for the Dolphins. Pick one.
Yeah, that's a good pick. I was just doing the math in my head, and I realized that's also terrible Jet offense. That means it was a 30-14 Dolphin win on average for Tua.
Yep, pretty much. That's pick one. Pick two. Go with the Saints laying the 5 against the Giants here in MetLife Stadium here. Going to be nobody in this building on Sunday, and there are going to be very few Giant fans showing up for this football game here. The Saints have got a little of the interim bump under Darren Rizzi. They have gotten some big plays from MVS in the passing game. And I think the Giants, they gave their big effort against Dallas last week. I don't see these guys caring against the Saints at home in a game that means nothing for them. They're out of the playoffs. They might go back to DeVito again if he's healthy. So give me the Saints here to cover this one.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick, even with the quarterback play of the Saints. I can tell you, I know a lot of people. Look, I live in Bergen County. I know a lot of people who are Giant fans, who have Giant season tickets, and opposing fans have been taking over that stadium, whether it's Eagle fans, whether it's Seahawk fans, just over the last few years, Seahawk fans, Bronco fans, Saints fans. The Buccaneers took over the last couple of weeks. I didn't even realize they had fans under the age of 70 outside the state of Florida. And so, people can really take over that very, very gloomy stadium.
All right, so that's pick two. Pick three, I'm going to take my only underdog of the week. I'm going to take all 12 points the Panthers against Philly this week here. This is not a slight against the Eagles here, who have been a very good team. They've been on fire. They made a big statement against Baltimore. To me, this is a look-ahead spot for Philly because they got 2 big games coming up here. They got the Steelers in week 15. They have the Commanders in a few weeks here. I think this is a spot where, the Panthers have been feisty. They've been playing much better. Bryce Young has looked good since he came back from his benching. And 12 points is a lot. I feel like there's a spot here where the Eagles, could be up by a bunch, take the foot off the gas. Bryce Young gets a late score, get the backdoor cover. I'll take the 12 points to the Panthers, my last one.
Yeah, I agree with that one as well. The truth is, the Eagles probably should have lost that game to the Ravens last week. If not for Justin Tucker missing 2 field goals and an extra point, the Ravens probably win that game. Lamar Jackson outplayed Jalen Hurts. And then the truth is, you look at another team last week in Kansas City that is, look, yeah, they play closer games than the Eagles probably, and they're not as dynamic right now offensively probably, but they play pretty responsibly, and they only beat the Panthers by 3 in that game. Bryce Young had a real resurgence, and that's been a key topic in the NFL the last couple of weeks. So I could definitely see Carolina covering in this game.
All right, so to reset the picks of the week, Chris gave you all the primetime games. So the Packers getting 3.5 against the Lions on Thursday night, the Chargers getting 4 in Kansas City on Sunday night, the Bengals laying 5.5 in Dallas on Monday night. My picks, anti-New York again, the Dolphins laying 6.5 against the Jets at home, the Saints laying 5 at MetLife against the New York Football Giants, and the Panthers getting 12 in Philly against the Eagles here. So those are your picks for week 14 here on the podcast. Coming up next week on the picks, and he's joined by a good friend of mine, Giant fan Justin Diaz, and he's one of our famous ranters here on the podcast, and he's already told me he has thoughts on the Giants letting Saquon go. So that's going to be a fun conversation next week.
Yeah, I feel like everybody had that is the most talked about thing in the league probably this year.
Yeah, that's it for sure here. And Chris, before I let you go, I would be remiss as the hockey guy not to ask you here, what the hell happened to the Rangers over the last week and a half?
Oh, buddy. You know what? I think most of the team is actually playing well, or at least decently. The funny thing is, I think there are a few key guys, and I talked about this with multiple people. It is Jacob Trouba again looks, obviously they wanted to trade him in the offseason. There was a reason for that, but it seems like there are, family issues, not an emergency or anything, but that are keeping him in New York. On top of that, I think, and the truth is, I said it last year too, Keandre Miller just looks irresponsible defensively as of late. And it doesn't quite make much sense to me. I don't know. Mika Zibanejad has been a little bit off. I've heard things about Ryan Lindgren. I tend to disagree, but that's been sort of the expert consensus that Ryan Lindgren's been off this season. The goaltending has been, Igor Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick can only do so much. Look, I still think this might not be the worst thing for them to falter a little early if they don't really go into panic mode, because the truth is, with what hockey is and what it is like watching the New York Rangers, all you got to do is get in. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And the idea of the President's Trophy clearly is not too alluring to anyone. If they're good enough to get in, it's all about conditioning in the last potentially 2 months. So there's a lot of time to go. And the truth is, if you're a Ranger fan, the one team that should concern you more than anyone is the Florida Panthers. The Panthers haven't played that well so far. That's the one team against whom they matched up poorly last season. It seems like every year they go up against a team against whom they don't match up well in the playoffs. The only team against whom they don't match up well. It's the Panthers last year. It was the Devils the year before. It's happened with Bruins, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's still very early. You really cannot hit the panic button yet. They are still, if they are not in the playoff picture, they are on the edge of the playoff picture. And I think that should also show how strong a team they've been in the regular season over the last, not just this era, but going back even a little before COVID to the Lundqvist era, the last 20 years or so, they've been one of the most consistent teams in the league. So I think there may need to be a retool, but you cannot hit the panic button right now.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting too, considering, you had the whole situation where we had the rumor last week that Chris Drury sent the memo to the league saying, hey, some of my big guys are available. And you could see that's kind of had a negative impact on the room.
Yeah, the Kreider one in particular did not make sense to me. I know he's been injured as of late, but I can't see Chris Kreider ending his career anywhere other than the Rangers. It just seems like, especially after, he's come through time and time again. The guy's been to 5 conference finals in his career. That's, believe it or not, that's as many as Sidney Crosby. Well, believe me, they're not in the same league. Well, they literally are, but not figuratively. And clearly he's the clutch postseason performer. He is the most successful skater they have had in quite some time in terms of, just productivity and longevity. I can't see him ending his career anywhere else. That's the one that really doesn't make sense to me, is putting him on the block.
Yeah, it doesn't make some sense for sure. We'll see how this plays out here. And Christopher, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People I'll follow you on social media and keep up with some of your content. How can they do that?
Yeah, you can find me on X at Chris Russo 98, CHRISRUSSO 98, on Instagram at Chris Russo 1998, or actually Chris Russo underscore 1998. You can find stuff about the podcast Sports in the Waiting Room. You can find pretty much kind of like how Kevin Weeks does those videos where it's like you can just see his forehead, like just forehead and his nose. That's kind of me, but you can see my full face, and I'm just walking around the rink for any given 87s game, or perhaps any All-Star game, et cetera, et cetera. You'll find me before just about any game I cover.